When I finished Lunacid with the release of 1.0, I felt disappointed. While many aspects of the game were great at worst and near perfect at best, the combat and everything having to do with it was lacking. Let me walk you through my summarized playthrough. I want you to understand where I'm coming from, so bear with me. I'm going to talk about the weapons for my character class 2, and spoilers ahead. Before I started my journey, I chose the Shinobi class. Dexterity and speed were all I needed. Getting through the early game was nothing short of amazing. I explored everything I could. And doing all of that got me enough silver to buy the crossbow in the shop. Very quickly, it became the double crossbow because I used it a lot, and I was very eager to upgrade it. Exploring the Yosei forest, I ended up finding the Elven Bow, and I was disappointed with it. You see, the Elven Bow is completely useless. The only way for this bow to be useful to me is if I didn't buy that crossbow and then upgrade it. And especially for my case, that wasn't going to happen. I started as a class that specializes in ranged combat. For something you have to find, I expected it to at least be a side grade or an alternative, but it's a complete downgrade. A possible adjustment that could be made is making it more accurate and maybe slightly stronger than the crossbow. Leave the crossbow to be the faster alternative. But I also thought one could add a mechanic to the Elven Bow where if you fully charge it, it will do light damage. Given where it is, I feel like that would make sense. But also, it makes the weapon more interesting. Honestly, Kira wouldn't have to do much to make this weapon worth using. I went to the Yosei forest to the accursed tomb. This place was interesting because it was kind of difficult navigating in the dark fighting the invisible enemies, Migos. But it definitely became more memorable because this is where I found the twisted staff. And from there, every single monster stood no chance against me. This weapon is seriously strong at this point in the game. It does fire damage, and it has a chance to burn, and it's also a great light source. Through the rest of the Accursed Tomb, to the Sanguine Sea, and through all of Castle Lefanu, I had no reason to use anything else, especially when everything in the castle was either weak to fire or simply neutral against it. The Twisted Staff is too good and definitely needs to be toned down. However, instead of a simple nerf, one could make it more of a unique tool. You can make it do less damage, but give it a 100% chance to burn enemies. This could give the weapon a chance to be used, but not the only weapon I need. In my case, I would use the staff to burn enemies and then switch to the double crossbow to continue damage. Doing something like that would be a lot more interesting. However, that power trip I had was insane. Oh, but I did skip over 2 weapons. In the Sanguine Sea, I ended up finding the corrupted Dagger. At the time, I didn't bother using it because I thought it was a melee only weapon, and I noticed it had low damage. If I knew I could throw it, I would have tried it out, but then get disappointed really quickly. It's a dark weapon, and only 2 of the 8 monsters can be hit with it in the castle. Only one of them is weak to dark, the Poltergeist. Which was how I found out the dagger isn't even dark element when it's in the throwing mode. As of this patch, it's normal, and that gives me an idea. The corrupted dagger, I'd make the description a reality. When you throw it, the dagger comes back. The dagger will do damage on first contact, going through the enemy, and then deals damage as it comes back. I would also split the damage, dark poison, for the melee and ranged mode, respectively. It would still keep the theme of the dagger being corrupted. It would keep the dark element, even if I hate it, and it gives dex built characters a poison weapon to use. That isn't the item, at least. In Castle Lefanu, you could get the Wand of Power. On my initial playthrough, I did not find this weapon. I had to go back after completing the game's first ending. The Wand of Power does more damage than the Twisted Staff, but every attack has a different element associated with it, thus meaning inconsistent DPS. Some enemies might be resistant or completely immune to some of the attacks that you throw out with the wand. Plus, the Twisted Staff charges faster, so I would still stick with that, even if I did find the wand. So what if you could see the element color glow on the wand? Every effect in Lunacid has a distinct color. You will know what element you get with each attack, but everything is still randomized. There could also be a specific effect that the wand can only do, an adjusted version of Cursed. When the monster attacks with it on, the curse will break. I would still keep it at a low chance of it proccing, and I would make sure it doesn't happen on bosses, because that is still insanely strong. Playing from the Boiling Grotto to the Tower of Abyss on day 1 when it was added was fun, but the one thing that stuck out to me more than anything was the fact that every monster was immune to fire, or at least very resistant. As devastated as I was, it was for the better. I got to use the double crossbow and alternated between the two weapons in the Tower of Abyss. Clearing both areas wasn't so hard, but the quest for the ranged weapon I didn't do until after completing the first ending, the Privateer Musket. The Privateer Musket is the slowest charging ranged weapon. It's inaccurate, and like the Corrupted Dagger, it deals dark damage. But out of all the ranged weapons, it does the most damage. Given its downsides, I know I wouldn't have used it if I got it during my journey. Personally, I don't care if it's the strongest weapon on the list. I'm not about to pray to RNGesus to help me that much. If I made any changes to this weapon, I would probably say increasing the damage it deals so you can justify how inaccurate it is, even if the damage that it deals is dark element. You could also add a secondary fire that roots an enemy in place when it hits. I wouldn't want it working on bosses, and I would say it shouldn't last no longer than half a second. I only want the player to benefit from finally landing a hit, given how inaccurate it is currently. When Kira released 1.0, the rest of Lunacid was added. I didn't think there would be another weapon like this staff, but my friend who was playing at the same time as me told me, Korthos, there is an upgrade to the staff. I made sure to go out of my way to get this weapon, and sure enough, I got it. It has slightly less speed, but way more damage. The Jailer's Candle. Getting the candle at this point of the game, the experience was more balanced, as some monsters had resistance but weren't completely immune, so it was still usable. I did have to switch to my double crossbow to handle certain enemies, but the candle was used heavily. It just wasn't as dominant as the Twisted Staff was when I got it. The only change I would make with this is simply lowering the burn chance, so you would still consider using the Twisted Staff still. But really, this weapon is pretty fine as is. During the journey, I was able to find the Fishing Spear. This weapon is a melee ranged mix, like the Corrupted Dagger. The Fishing Spear isn't that bad. The weapon itself is only a bit too weak compared to what I was using, the candle and the double crossbow. Like the change I made to the Corrupted Dagger, I wanted to do the same here, except changing the elements to normal and ice for melee and range. The only other change I would make is increasing the damage by a little bit, but I couldn't think of anything else. Dex builds would finally have an ice weapon to use that isn't restricted to the RNG with the Wand of Power. So, we've made it to the end of the game, where I fought John Lizardman himself, Sexarius. Originally, I thought it was gonna be somewhat of an easy fight, but the fight made me hate the RPG stat system in Lunacid, and got me to look back at the combat as a whole. Sexarius has a ton of health, defense, and HP regen. While I don't have footage of myself trying to only use the candle, I can tell you I hated every minute of it. I do, however, have the winning strategy, using Lava Chasm with my 5 intelligence. My goal with my character was to use ranged weapons, and use support magic if available. My build was valid, and there was even enough support magic for me to use. It all worked fine, up to this point. My first time fighting Sexarius, I legitimately thought I was missing an item with how little progress I was making. but there wasn't. And at the time, I thought about everything I could do, and all there was for me to use was the left mouse button. My friend felt the same way, so we looked up strategies that we could use, and that's where we found out about Lava Chasm working. And when I saw how well that was working for how tiny that stat was, I thought to myself, what was the point in the stat system in the first place? Lunacid is a dungeon crawling RPG. You pick a class with the stat placements you want to use the most. For me, that was Dex and Speed with some defense, but not many monsters got to hit me at the time. Let's say I beat Sixarius after a while pelting him with fireballs or arrows, or somehow the health regen was removed, so I could make progress. I would be rewarded with the Lucid Blade, no matter how I beat Sixarius, a melee weapon that greatly outclasses everything else I have. And looking at everything else in the post-game, they're all melee weapons. I went from using dexterity, intelligence, to strength if I decided to do the post-game. Honestly, it was depressing going from the small 2 usable weapons at a time out of the 8 to 0. That's why I talked about the weapons like I did, because I wanted to know what would make me use the weapons that I found throughout my journey. I also wondered what the game would be like if the RPG stats were removed. Maybe the weapons could have more uses outside of simply doing more damage. The player can choose the weapons, magic, and items that they want to use at the time. No tool in the player's kit would be limited to the stats that they invested in, only in what they found throughout their journey. Plus, the HP and MP can be increased from the earth and ocean elixirs that you find throughout your journey. Then exploration would be more rewarding as a whole. However, making those kind of changes would mean rebalancing the whole game, and that would be a lot to do. You might as well make a new game at that point. It just simply sucks that Lunacid ended on this note for me. Lunacid was fun, exploring the world, finding and interacting with NPCs, and simply just vibing with the levels. Revisiting the maps that I completed reminded me how much I loved exploring in this game. However, anything affecting combat was weak. The RPG elements and the weapon balance, as far as the range weapons go. Maybe the melee combat's different, I'm unsure. The short time I had with the melee combat wasn't that fun anyway. I just wish there was more to the combat in the first place. Oh well, on to the next one. Hey, I'm glad you can make it to the end of the video. Let me know how I did on making this, because this is my first time creating a video like this. See you in the next one.